So today I am going to talk a lot about poo, because this is something we all do, I hope. And everybody in this room probably pooed this very morning, and we probably flushed that away with perfectly drinkable water. And this is a luxury that separates us from the 1,000 children who will die today and every day from very preventable water and sanitation-related diarrheal diseases, from the 2.1 billion people who lack access to safe water and the 4.5 billion who lack access to sanitation. Statistically, you probably poo around 110 grams a day, 1.2 times a day, every day. This is a bag of 110 grams of rice, which I would like to pass around the audience so you can feel what your poo weighs like. And I want you to imagine you and then everybody in this room and then everybody in this city and this country pooing every day and the colossal amount of waste we generate. For a city like London, that means that Victorian pipes that are about 100 to 150 years old are moving 8.7 million people's waste. That's over 2 million pounds of poo every day. That's like the equivalent of 3 747 Boeings at max takeoff weight. And that's just the effluent. Our sewers also move rainwater, grey water from our sinks, washing machines, showers, and unfortunately also tampons and baby wipes and oil. London's sewer system is a phenomenal feat of engineering that's only today receiving its first major upgrade. But now let's take a city like Delhi. With over double the population of London, 18.6 million people, and if we use the same figures, that's like 4.3 million pounds of poo, 6 747-100s at max takeoff weight, daily produced by its population. But unlike London, only half of Delhi's effluent is connected into a sewer, and those lines don't 100% connect to sewage treatment plants. And the other half is collected in cesspits or septic tanks, very commonly underneath people's homes. And the responsibility of that effluent doesn't fall onto the municipality, but onto the property owner. And they, in turn, will often get rid of that wet waste by calling up private contractors who come with trucks and pump that effluent away. In theory, those trucks are meant to go to sewage treatment plants, but in practice, they end up being dumped into open drains and open bodies of water. And the end result is that around 90% of sewage produced in Delhi ends up in the Yamuna River, untreated. Now, we should all care about this, but architects should definitely care about this, because between now and 2030, India needs to build something like 44 Delhis to deal with its urbanizing population. And I don't say this necessarily as a bad thing. I believe that moving people to cities can be opportunities of growth and hope and social change, and arguably the fastest way out of poverty. But unfortunately, today, cities are some of the most unequal places in the world. Urban inequality is higher today than it was in the 1920s. And broadly, the poor are less poor, but we've become more unequal by race and more unequal by income in the last 20 years. And water flows, drainage pipes, S-traps, these things that my profession, architecture, seems to care little about, they might sound trivial, but they're actually incredibly important, because in their absence, they're defining some of the most unequal conditions in the world. And I've seen this play out in the field. The kid with diarrhea, a woman with a urinary tract infection, and a man who's lost his job because he's ill too much. And architecture and design seemingly has nothing to do with those problems. The boy needs clean water, the woman needs a doctor, and arguably the man needs a national health service. But actually, what unites all those experiences is the need for a toilet. Because if that boy had a toilet in his home, he would much less likely have diarrhea, the single biggest killer of children. And the woman, she could go to the toilet when she needs to and not have to hold her urine. One of the biggest problems, health problems facing urban poor women is urinary tract infections from holding their pee. And if the man lived in an area connected with a sewer, it means that he would far less likely to be sick and less likely to lose his job. India loses 5% of its GDP annually on health-related illnesses associated with inadequate sanitation. So I'm going to spend the rest of my talk talking about how designing and building toilets and sewers can address challenges of health, jobs, income, education, but also more broadly issues of urban inequality, social justice, and inclusive development. Because how and where you poo is how we divide the haves and the have-nots. So let's start with the boy and his toilet. The thing that I've learned in the field is that toilets are one of the single biggest drivers for housing investment. Here is a series of photographs of one house incrementally changing over time. And what you can see is that in 2010, the family would wash outside and defecate in the field. By 2011, all those activities have moved into the house. And this has largely been triggered by the desire for a toilet, which is in turn often triggered by a young girl coming of age, a bride entering into the family home, or the birth of young children. And it's centered around the inclusion of a toilet. This incremental mode of city making is central to how the urban poor make claims to the city. The result is a kind of spectrum of housing types that can be found in working class, poorer communities that begin with really precarious and temporary building materials such as bamboo and tarpaulin, and then incrementally with the addition of load-bearing walls and roofs and foundations, houses can grow vertically, and once they can grow vertically, that critically enables space for other income-generating activities such as shops or rentals. And then finally, at the end, a multi-story home that delivers a better, safer, and enriched living environment. And since doing this research, I've spent a lot of my time thinking about how we as designers can accelerate and learn from this process. Working with a team of architects in India, we've designed a module for affordable housing, which proposes, in the context of state intervention, to build the most essential, elemental, core elements for housing. We propose that that is foundations, a structural frame, and a toilet, and that the rest can be infilled over time by residents. I've previously tested this idea in a resettlement community in India, and whilst this building really doesn't look like much, we managed to save costs by 30%. Now let's move to the woman with a urinary tract infection. Women disproportionately bear the brunt of poor water and sanitation. We have a much closer relationship with water, and so women are far more affected by any deficiency. Women menstruate, women largely do the childcare, and women are affected by issues of safety. Men aren't. So open defecation and poorly managed community toilet complexes leave women, particularly young girls, vulnerable to rape and assault. In one Indian state, nearly 400 girls were raped, and the evidence says that this could have been avoided if they'd had access to safe sewage, safe toilets. And more recently, it's been estimated that 1 in 5 girls will drop out of school when they get their periods, and in some regions of India, that's more like 4 in 5. This is a damning indictment on a country that finds the money to spend $1.5 billion on a space program annually. But if we put women at the center of our projects, the outlook can be far more positive. So working with a local NGO in Delhi, when we have built sanitation for low-income communities, women have been the backbone of these interventions. Because retrofitting sanitation requires working very closely with residents, working very closely with existing housing, with existing hard-fought investments. And we found that through this kind of engagement, women can really drive projects forward, such as these women who formed an operations and maintenance committee during the early stages of the design work, and then post-build have been running the sewage infrastructure. And what we see here is how sewage interventions for low-income communities can be so much more than just a pipe that you can poo in. Here we see that these processes can transform the humiliation and victimization of defecating in the open into projects of exercises and capacity and technical knowledge and self-dignification. However, not all projects end up like this. I was recently involved in a project to build a shared toilet in an unserviced slum in central Delhi. However, this clustering of houses was inhabited overwhelmingly by men who didn't feel the need for a toilet and who were worried about demolition due to regeneration plans in the vicinity. But all the women did. So navigating issues of gender and class and caste can often feel insurmountable. And this requires a kind of patient practice, which is often in conflict with how urban change happens, which is quick, and where regeneration is actually often a fancy word for removing the less powerful. The last character, our man who is always sick. The problem with open defecation is that even if you do everything right, you drink clean water, you build a toilet, you wash your hands, it just takes a few people to poo in the open, and then you become vulnerable, because a fly can land on that poo and land on your mouth, or wind can blow dust from that poo onto your food. And this is why we need collective solutions for this very collective problem. The second problem, building toilets with no sewers can simply make the problem worse, with effluent flowing into open drains and left to percolate into the ground, polluting our really valuable groundwater supplies. And the frustrating thing is that actually we have the solutions readily available and at the right price point. Working with a local NGO in 2014, we built a simple, decentralized sewage network to cater for 300 households on the edge of Delhi, managed by those women I showed you earlier, and built by local laborers. For $50,000, we could service an entire community of around 2,000 people. It's possible. So I want to wrap up by saying that the people who've executed the most change for those in lower income communities and groups are they themselves. They are the only ones who've built housing at the kind of scale that's required. They are the only ones who have tapped into mains when the state and the private sector has failed. And in addition to that, they're the ones who pay the most for electricity and water when they get it. So, if the architect of the future is to be concerned about how most of the world lives and the role design can play in addressing issues of social justice, urban inequality, development interventions must be framed as an exercise about what we can learn from those very people who've done the most, and learn from the everyday stories of their lives. And within that, the sewer becomes a riddle with many answers, and many of those answers are actually questions about gender, about race, class, caste, but also about space and urban development and the twisted myth of world-class city narratives and urban regeneration. Basil Getz Genius, the man who built London sewers, has never really resonated with the British public, but people should be grateful to be made to think about their own poo, because imagine you and then everybody in this room and everybody in this city trying to get rid of that bag of rice every day for the rest of your life. The time spent, the money wasted, and the illness had when you can't just simply flush it away. Thank you.